Hey guys, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the style of low poly art. We talked about it a little bit for our sketchbook assignment, but before we plan our project, I just wanted you to see some different examples and artists so you could think on what you want to do for the project. So the important thing to know is that low poly art basically is a style. So it is, a way of creating. It's just a different style of doing things. So just like realism is a style, so is low poly art. So, what is it? Low poly art is basically breaking things into geometric shapes, which changes the way that they look. So, it could be a scene, it could be an object, a person, it could be an animal, but basically you're taking something and you're abstracting it, so you're changing it, you're making it original, you're making it your own, and it kind of has this neat modern feel to it as well. So here's some examples by this contemporary artist that I found that I really loved, named Laura Befana, where she has taken landscapes and she has broken them into geometric shapes. So again, could be triangles, but also could be any type of geometric shape. And you can see in hers, most of hers are triangles, but if you look closely, like not all of them are triangles. And you will see that things do start to take on, more angular look, right? And that's okay. That's, what the style is. One of the things that I love about her paintings is you can really see like all the different colors in her shapes and how that really starts to make her images look more 3D. Um, so that's going to be really important to our project because we are going to be mixing our different colors for our idea or whatever you come up with. So I thought hers was a really good example of that. But anyway, so low poly art is a pretty modern idea and it was inspired by 3D modelings for video games. So if some of the images kind of remind you of video games, you're right. That is where that idea comes from. So I put a link for you guys in here. You can see some different examples of like where low poly art comes from and just some different examples for you guys. So that's there. But so influenced by 3D video games, but if you look at it, I think that low poly art had origins from a long time before that. So we're going to look at some other things too. So in art, everything is a remix. So you're taking different ideas and you're fusing them together to make your own idea, right? So low poly art reminds me a lot of Cubism. So Cubism was started by Pablo Picasso, and you've probably heard the name Picasso before. This really famous artist. And he did all kinds of different things. So this is like one of his phases. He has other phases too. But this one is probably what a lot of people know him for. So he had this style of painting where he would take things and break them into sharp fragmented pieces. And it was called pointillism, right? So this was happening like in the early 1900s, and it became pretty famous. So, and again, you've probably heard of Pablo Picasso, but if you look up his artwork, this is just one little style that he did out of multiple different styles in his career. He also used really like bright, bold colors that are not realistic. He could paint realistically if he wanted to, but this was something else that he was trying. Okay, so a couple other artists that remind me of low poly art. So this is Oscar Howe, and he was an artist a little bit later than Picasso. And I learned about him in college, and I just loved his artwork. So um, he's a Yanktonai American Indian, and he grew up on an Indian reservation and went to this boarding school. And while he was there, he was interested in art, and he was encouraged to embrace some of his tribal culture into what he was doing. So he did that, but he also had this like contemporary way of doing it, and it wasn't liked by everybody. A lot of people felt like his stuff wasn't traditional enough, but he had this like stylistic approach where he broke things into those geometric forms. Look at the background, and you can see like in the dancer all the different shapes, and you can look and see over here. So he's really well known for kind of like starting the contemporary American Indian art movement. So he kind of paved the way for others to do that. So different subject matter, different inspiration, but kind of reminds me a little bit of low poly art. Again, I put a link for you guys in here to check out Oscar Howe's work and see some of his other pieces. But I think his stuff is really interesting. Okay, and the other person that kind of reminds me of low poly art is Charlie Harper. So again, he was an artist even a little bit later than Oscar Howe. And he was from West Virginia and really liked to study wildlife. So he was very interested in animals and nature and going outside and observing them. And instead of like attention to realism and detail, he felt like that was kind of boring. He really liked to look at like shapes and textures and patterns that he saw in animals. And he came up with this totally different style of illustrating them. So, this kind of simplified breaking animals into more geometric shapes. Which is really interesting too. So all three of those artists, four really, if you're counting Laura Bufano, have a really different approach. They're all unique styles, right? But if you look, each one a little bit could have been an influence for low poly art, right? Um, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to create our own low poly art design by breaking an image or creating an image of your own into geometric shapes. So the larger the shapes, the more simple, and the smaller the shapes, the more complex. So you kind of want to be in between. You don't want things that are so tiny that you're not going to be able to paint it. But if your sections are too big, it's actually going to be hard to paint as well because your paint's going to dry before you finish a section. So you want kind of somewhere in between. You don't want huge sections, but you don't want itty bitty little sections either. A realistic challenge. So we are really going to be working on color mixing for this project. We've just learned about color theory, so that's going to be really big. We're going to be creating different values, so lights and darks of colors, but also tones, so warms and cools of colors. We're going to be using those primary colors, the yellow, red, and blue, and also white and black. But we've learned that we can make any color using those. So this is going to be a really good opportunity to do that. But our other goal here is we're going to really work on our craftsmanship. So with the drawing, taking the time, using a ruler for straight lines, but then also control in our painting. So control with our glide, having enough paint mixed, brush stroke direction, all of that. This is a great opportunity to really work on your control with your painting. So we're looking for the idea, we're looking for breaking it into low poly, I'm looking for the color mixing, and I'm looking for your craftsmanship. And then as always, your overall effort and your self-challenge. So first, what you're going to do is you're going to do your planning sheet. So you'll have to come up with some different ideas. And then once you have your idea that you really want to do, you're going to break it down into geometric shapes so you can see what it's going to look like. And this might be something where you want to try it with a couple and then choose which one you think looks the best. So here's my example that I did. I did a hummingbird on a flower. And I actually found that some of these sections were too big. So I ended up breaking, like, this is probably like a perfect size. So I ended up breaking some of these bigger sections into smaller sections because it was a lot easier to paint. So 1 second, Keely, I'm almost done. Anyway, so this is probably a really good example of what you want yours to look like. Think stained glass. That's basically what you're doing. So once you have your design chosen that you're going to want to do, you're going to lightly sketch it out on good paper. We're not worrying about that this week, but later down the road, we'll sketch it out on good paper. We'll use a ruler, and then we'll actually paint it. But for this week, you're just focusing on coming up with the ideas and then practicing breaking that into low poly. Then eventually we'll worry about painting and color mixing and applying all that paint. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So I look forward to seeing what ideas you come up with, and I hope to see you guys soon. Oh no, it didn't record. No. Oh, it did record. Okay. Huh.